Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're going deep this time into something called speech acts. It's basically how we do things, not just with words, but with words.
With words. Yeah.
Yeah, and it might sound kind of obvious at first, but trust me, this stuff gets really interesting.
Yeah.
We're mainly using John Searle's What is a Speech Act today. He's like a big deal in language philosophy, so, we're not messing around. And to get us started, have you ever noticed how you can say something that sounds totally neutral on paper? But if you tweak your tone a little bit or, emphasize a certain word, suddenly it takes on a whole other meaning.
Totally. Like
Yeah.
sarcasm.
Yes, exactly. Or even something like, oh, that's so thoughtful, depending on how you say it, could be genuine or...
Or the opposite.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's the kind of territory we're going to be exploring today.
Exactly. And Searle's big idea is that just saying the words is like only half the battle.
Right.
It's the intention behind those words, and then what happens because of those words that makes it a speech act. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy actually has some good stuff on this, too.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't realize they went into this.
Yeah, it's in there.
So it's like saying I promise versus actually meaning it when you say it.
Exactly. Or, think about this. You ask, is the door closed?
Okay.
Could be a simple question,
Right.
But it could also be a really roundabout way of saying, hey, can someone please close that door?
It's like hinting at something.
Exactly. Same
Yeah.
words, totally different vibe depending on what you're going for.
I like that different vibe.
Yeah. And to really hammer this home, there's this example from Searle's work that always kind of stuck with me. It's about this soldier in World War II, and he gets captured, doesn't speak much German, but to try and throw his captors off, he starts reciting this German poem from memory.
Oh, wow. High stakes. So he's hoping they'll think he's fluent even if he's messing up the words.
Well, it's more like he's using those words with the intention of getting them to see him a certain way.
Right. Like, hey, I'm one of you.
Yeah. Even if the actual poem is about something totally different, it shows how much context matters.
Yeah, context's huge.
The soldier's intention is to perform this act of convincing them to let him go, even if the literal words are just, a poem about a tree or something.
That's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. It's like this hidden layer of meaning under our everyday conversations.
Exactly. And we're not always aware of it, but it's
Yeah.
always there.
So how does this whole speech act thing actually matter in the real world? Like, why should someone listening care about this beyond a philosophy class?
Well, think about it. Every job, every relationship you have, it all relies on communicating clearly right.
Yeah.
But we've all had those moments where things go south.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Deals fall apart, friends get in fights, and it's often because what we meant got lost in translation.
We said the words, but they weren't the right words.
Right. And Searle's work gives us a way to decode that, to understand how those miscommunications happen and how to avoid them.
So we've got all these different levels to our words, but how do we break those down? I mean, Searle goes really deep on promises. He's trying to write the rule book for a game nobody knew had rules.
That's a good way to put it. He lays out these really specific conditions for what makes a promise legit. And he's not hung up on weird edge cases either. He wants to get at the core of promiseness.
Right. We're not talking about robot promises or promises you shout during a hurricane. It's what's the DNA of a normal everyday promise?
Exactly. And he breaks that down even further. First, you've got the actual content of the promise itself. You can't promise something that already happened.
Makes sense.
Or something you have zero control over. It's like, I promise I'll win the lottery.
Or I promise it'll rain tomorrow.
Right. You've got to be talking about the future and something you can actually impact.
Okay, so the promise has to be possible. Basically.
Pretty much. Then there's the whole context thing Searle calls these preparatory conditions. Imagine you walk into a random office and try to fire someone.
That's bold.
Right. But the point is you can't just fire someone from a job you don't have any authority over. So the roles we're in matter a lot.
It's like you can't promise to give away someone else's car. It just wouldn't work.
Exactly. Context. And then there's this big one, sincerity.
Oh, yeah. That's huge.
You can't really promise something unless you actually mean it, deep down.
And that's where it gets tricky, because people lie.
All the time. And Searle even points out how we use I promise, even when it's not a real promise.
Oh, for sure. Just to emphasize something.
Totally. Say you're accused of something you didn't do. You might be like, no way, I promise you it wasn't me.
You're not actually promising, but it makes your denial stronger.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It adds weight to your words, even if it's not a binding contract kind of promise.
So you're using promise for a different speech act, even if the words are the same. That's wild.
Right. And then the Searle gets into this other condition, the non-obviousness condition.
Okay.
And he gives this example that always makes me laugh. It's about a happily married man promising his wife he won't leave her in the next week.
Oh boy, I can already see where this is going.
It's hilarious because it's so true. Why even make that promise unless something's already up? It's the opposite of reassuring.
Totally. It's like bringing doubt into the equation just by mentioning it. So Searle's really dissecting this everyday thing, this promise, and showing us all these hidden mechanics that make it tick.
And what's cool is that this stuff goes way beyond promises.
Mm.
Searle focuses on them, but the Stanford Encyclopedia, they go broader. They talk about assertions, questions, requests. It's like this whole language buffet we're picking from without realizing it.
Okay, I like that. A language buffet. So how does this buffet work in real life? Give me the layman's guide to using these speech act tools.
Well, think of it like this. Different situations call for different speech act meals.
Hmm,
Right.
I'm with you.
And if you use the wrong one in the wrong situation, that's where you get miscommunications, arguments,
Yeah.
maybe even deals falling apart.
So it's not just about knowing what a speech act is. It's about using the right one at the right time.
Exactly. Being precise matters, especially when the stakes are high. And it all goes back to that difference between what we say and what we mean. Think about that soldier with his poem again. The words were German, but his intention was escape.
It was a whole different message under the surface.
Right. And the Stanford Encyclopedia actually has terms for this. They call it the difference between locutionary and illocutionary acts.
Okay, that's a mouthful.
Yeah, it's a bit jargony.
Yeah.
But basically it means there's the surface level of the words themselves, and then this deeper level of what we're doing with those words.
It's like there's always more going on than meets the eye.
Exactly. And that's what makes this stuff so fascinating.
So far, we've been talking about how understanding these speech acts can help us avoid misunderstandings, right? But the Stanford Encyclopedia talks about this other side to it that's kind of less fun. They call it illocutionary silencing.
Yeah, that's a heavy one. It's basically saying that because of like power dynamics and social hierarchies, not everyone gets to do things with their words equally.
Really? Even if they're using all the right speech acts.
Right. They might say all the right things, but because of who they are or where they fit, those words don't land the same way. Like their speech act gets muted or ignored.
Wow. Okay, so give me an example.
Well, let's say you're in a workplace where there's a lot of like discrimination going on. If someone from a marginalized group tries to say no to something they don't want to do.
Like unwanted advances or something?
Exactly. They might get ignored, or people might dismiss them. Their refusal, their speech act of refusing, doesn't have the impact it should, even though they're using the right words.
It's like their voice isn't being heard.
Exactly.
Hmm?
And it goes beyond just refusals, too. Think about promises. If a group of people have been lied to or denied opportunities over and over,
Like historically.
yeah, their promises might not carry the same weight as someone from a more privileged background, even if they're just as sincere.
Because there's this history that overshadows their words.
Right. It's not a level playing field when it comes to communication.
Yeah.
And that's what makes this idea of illocutionary silencing so powerful, but also really unsettling.
It makes you think about all the times someone's words might have been brushed aside or not taken seriously. And it might not have been about what they said, but who was saying it.
Exactly. Searle's work focuses on the individual speaker. But we can't ignore the fact that our words exist in these complex social ecosystems. And those ecosystems impact how our words are received.
So this whole deep dive wasn't just about understanding language in a vacuum. It's about seeing the real-world weight behind our words and how that weight can be distributed unfairly.
Absolutely. It's about becoming more aware of those power dynamics and using that awareness to communicate more effectively, but also to advocate for those whose voices aren't being heard.
To make sure everyone's speech acts have the chance to land. So to sum it all up, understanding speech acts is like gaining this whole new toolkit for navigating the world of communication. It's about thinking beyond just the words themselves to see the intention, the context, the social forces at play.
And hopefully by being more mindful of all those things, we can create a world where everyone's voice matters.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into speech acts. We'll see you next time for another adventure in knowledge.